Today's video is going to be on removing a strip lug nut, and what a handy little tool for when the edges of the lug nut get worn off, usually by the lug nut seizing up over the winter. You're going to change your put your winter tires on. Anyway, if those edges get rounded, there's a handy dandy little tool for taking those off. The only thing is, it only works on certain types of lug nuts. This would be one that it wouldn't work on because the nut itself is not threaded. But if we look at these ones, we can see that beyond the nut part here of the lug nut, there's actually threads down here. And then what we can do is take this socket. This is actually not the right size socket out of the kit. We'll use the proper one later, obviously. And this is reverse threaded, and it'll go on, unlike a normal socket, which if you were putting it on something, screwing it on something, it would be going clockwise. This one threads counterclockwise, and when it gets to the end of the thread there, then it actually starts to turn the lug nut. So here's our lug nut in question, severely stripped around here, basically rounded. If we look at one of the other ones, we can actually see the nice flat edges here. And this one, as you can see, basically has no real edge for our socket to grip properly. So I'm just going to briefly describe how this process went wrong for me here. I had the proper wheel wrench for it. Put it over the lug nut, the wheel nut, which that it won't even hold because it's stripped. So, put that on there. I used my helper bar, which theoretically a lot of people say you shouldn't use. Most people that say that haven't had issues like this. Then I strategically put my big old boot on top of it and put my weight on it. If you're going to do that, be careful that you don't slip. Anyway, that's something that's regularly done. You want to be careful doing it. I'm not recommending it, but it's something that I do when I have to. You get a lot of extra, obviously a lot of extra force that you wouldn't get otherwise. Theoretically, that should have worked. There's also the risk too that the stud in here might let loose. But anyway, what happened in this situation here, if we look at the end of our wrench here, as I say, it's not like I was using a wrench that was too big or anything like that, because that's definitely going to strip a bolt that's tight. But what happened is the end of the wrench itself, because I was using so much force to try to get that seized nut off, the end of the wrench actually let loose. And when that cracked and expanded, obviously it stripped the outside of the wheel nut. So there's two things I want to do to these lug nuts before I actually put that socket on. One thing is clean as much debris off of those threads as I can with a wire brush. I've already cleaned it. And I find handy, if you don't have a small wire brush, an old toothbrush will do too. That'll get a lot of that crud off of there. I'll clean that off. As I say, I've already done this. Cleaned it off. And once you do that, then you want to soak as much anti-seize compound on there as you can and still make it workable. Good time to wear safety glasses too, anytime when you're cleaning things off like that. But you want anti-seize on there because after this is all done, that socket is going to be really tight on that lug nut. And I'm actually going to take the socket itself and put the anti-seize on the inside threads of it also. Now I'm going to thread our socket onto the nut. Now this is reversed of the way this would normally be. Normally, counterclockwise is going to loosen something off. In this case, counterclockwise, because as we said it's a reverse thread socket, is going to tighten this on here. I'm going to be very careful about doing this, because the last thing I want to do is strip those threads on the lug nut. So I just threaded it on a little bit. I'm going to take it off there, just make sure that I'm actually onto that lug nut properly. It's on there. If I try to pull it off, it won't come off. See that? The instructions for this advise using an impact wrench. I'm not actually going to go that route. Just going to tighten it on, as I say, with my regular wrench here. It's going on. I can tell it's not cross-threaded. I've got it on far enough now that I can tell that's not cross-threaded. So now I'll get the big wrench. Put a bit of leverage behind it. Okay, now I got the big wrench on there for a little extra persuasion. As I said, I'm not going to get too aggressive here. We'll just kind of take it a bit at a time. See how it goes. So for the first while, that socket is still going to be going onto the threads of the bolt, or the nut rather. After we do this for a bit, it's actually going to start turning that wheel nut, and it is tight. The ratchet on this wrench is busted too, so I have to keep moving it. Let's keep this wrench handy because it's nice and long. You get the idea. So, after a lot of effort with the big persuasive wrench, that lug nut finally let loose. Now, I was a little concerned that I was going to break the stud there. Luckily that didn't happen. So there's our lug nut. Now, what I'm going to have to do is to get this off of the wrench here, I'll videotape this if I get a chance, is I'm going to have to put flats on this, grind flats on that, put it in the vise, and turn it off. But anyway, as I say, I was concerned about this because obviously when we're using that big wrench in a system like this, we're putting way more torque on these nuts and that stud than it was ever designed for. But anyway, system worked, we got it off. And just to verify that all that torque that we were applying to that stud didn't actually damage it, I'm going to take one of the other wheel nuts here and spin it on there. And as we can see, that goes on there fine. So we lucked out. We didn't damage anything there.